little thing called the Design Observer Cooperative, and once a month we do something at lunchtime, and we realized these were so special we'd open them up to the public. So thank you, those of you who are not part of the co-op. Betsy Vardell, who's here, is going to wave in the top left there, is going to put in the chat how you can join our cooperative and have even more fun. But for now, we've got an hour with a very dear friend of ours, Eric Heiman. Tell me how you pronounce your name. Heiman. I thought so. Eric is a triple threat. He can write, he can design. He's trained as an architect. He's also very funny. I hope he'll be funny today. He makes me laugh. I have so many wonderful things I can say about him, but let me just say a few words about his studio, which is in San Francisco, where they do site-specific branding. They do user experience design, visual storytelling, an incredible sense of design and space and humanism and typography. He teaches, he's a mentor, an educator, a steward of all wonderful design ideas. And there's something just very special about being able to take an hour out of everyone's busy day to look at beautiful work from a really smart, thoughtful designer. So welcome, Eric, and thank you. Take it away.
Cool. Well, first I want to say thanks, Jessica, for having me. Of course, I've been a Design Observer fan since the beginning, and it's an honor to be here and to see a lot of familiar faces, from peers to family to new people. And I will might as well just get started here, so we have time to talk after. So let's give me a second. The awkward share part of the day. All right. Trying to get rid of my, there we go. All right, so hi everybody. Kind of had to put this up. SF, our homegrown vice president. It's a new day, which we definitely sort of needed, I think. So it feels good, right? Does everybody else feel good about this? I hope so. I do. So I'm just gonna, when I give these talks, I always sort of have these windy sort of stories that I tell, and try to get sort of a single project in there to kind of illustrate all those ideas. So this is a talk in two parts. The first part I'm calling how did we get here? So as Jessica said, I have been running with my creative partner Adam Broadsley for 20 years this year, Volume Inc. in San Francisco. It's hard to believe. We've been duking it out mostly in friendly ways over the work for the last 2 decades, and we started in, I would say, a very sort of traditional, and I think at the core, we're still very much a traditional design firm in the sense that we do a lot of campaigns and publications and digital media and branding for a collection of organizations, whether they be commercial, cultural, nonprofits, civic. And I would say the one through line for us is that we're always trying to find jobs that have a lot of meat on the bone, a lot of content and weight to them, and that's part of where our name comes from. But I would say in recent years, we've started to branch out and into this more what I call the liminal space between graphic design and architecture. And this manifests in a multitude of ways. One is exhibit programs for museums. This is from the California Academy of Sciences in San Francisco. What we call sort of workspace branding, where companies come to us and have offices or sites, and they want us to kind of create sort of a wayfinding and narrative sort of system to that it extends to their offices. And then lately, we've also been expanding into more sort of urban design interventions. This is a dilapidated pier in Oakland that was redeveloped, called Brooklyn Basin, and we were asked to come in and kind of create this sort of narrative, wayfinding, placemaking layer on top of the new architecture and urban development that was happening here. So Ab and I were both both came of age in the early 90s and in design. And if anybody out there was a student or a practitioner then, it was this sort of heady time where that was really exciting, and that design was starting to become a lot more sort of self-critical and beginning to think about, like, how could design be more than just this passive vessel of commerce and actually be this tool to express things that maybe are a little bit more ambivalent, maybe question things, just look at it from a much more kind of interrogative place. And that, coupled with the fact that Adam and I are both squarely in the Gen X generation, I think we personally bring a lot of, I would say, healthy skepticism and ambivalence to what we do. And so this questioning on all fronts of how we do the work, who we do the work for, how it sort of comes out is foundational to our practice. And so the way this manifests in reality, at least for me personally, like Jessica said, is that I am also a teacher at CCA. I've been teaching for as long as we've been in business. I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but teaching is always a great place to sort of put these ideas into motion. On occasion, I will also sort of write or self-publish, when I get maybe irritated enough with something that's going on in design to sort of also, voice my ambivalence about things maybe that are happening out in the world of design. But to us, it still really goes back to the work. The work really you have to walk the walk to really be able to talk this talk. And I think sometimes the most obvious places for this critical design stuff is when organizations come to you and say, hey, you want to do a poster for this show? And the one on the left was for this company, Public Bikes, and they were asking us to posit ideas about what it means to be public. The one on the right was for this SF Design Week show around community. And then for another fundraiser, we had to deck out a money doll. We created an enemy combatant doll to sort of speak to the politics of the time. This feels so quaint now. Remember the Bush era? Wow, those were the days, or not. But this stuff to me is fairly common, I think, in the design world. I think all designers try to sort of, participate in this. And I think for us, it's really the commission client work that is the real challenge and the real opportunity and the real interest we have in this sort of more interrogative process. And so, why couldn't an exhibit catalog about the participation art that's participation based be two books? One that is at the actual real catalog that you get when you go to the show, and then a book you get, an on-demand book you get later that actually documents people participating in the run of the show that you went to. Or why couldn't, all the copy on a website change depending on the kind of visitor that's coming to it? In this case, we actually wrote 5 different sets of copy for the different types of people that would come to look at this website. Why couldn't the promotion for an art exhibit about the facilitation of art actually literally facilitate art? We did this in a collaboration with Mendy Design some years ago too. Why couldn't, in a giant office, could we not insert little 6-word memoir pieces of poetry on the structural beams for workers and visitors to discover in this giant hall of an office that is otherwise maybe a little bit cold and remote? Why couldn't a lesson on sustainability be a kinetic sculpture rather than a didactic exhibit panel? And then why couldn't in a news media office in Washington, D.C., why couldn't we carve the entire text of the First Amendment in marble around the perimeter of the office, creating this symbolic protective moat for the journalists within, and inadvertently, because it was installed in the fall of 2016, become this symbol of resistance for the journalists that work within? And so I think that all this questioning that we do, to us really feels important in this work that is sort of out in the world. And I think what ultimately elevates it to us. Oh, this is some more photos of that. Free press. Yeah. Go free press. And so a few years back when the Western Gallery at Western Washington University in Bellingham came to us and said, hey, do you want to do a show about your work at our gallery? We said, yeah, of course. Like, design firms like us don't get, and we don't do a lot of the sort of what I would call sort of arty mixed design. I say, you know, and when someone comes to us and says they want to do a show, of course we're going to say yes. And of course we assumed we'd get there and it'd be like this little hall and you'd hang a few things and you'd be done. And we got here and instead it was this giant 4,000 square foot gallery with 20-foot high ceilings. And so, you know, we thought to ourselves, okay, like, well, maybe this shouldn't be like the normal precious art exhibit. Maybe when people visit and encounter our work in this show, you can walk through it, you can touch it, you can open up the books, you can actually experience it as close to as you would in real life. And, you know, with that, why couldn't we begin to also reveal the fact that, you know, as a design firm, we have failures and struggles as much as we have successes. That last poster on the lower right there is we get that a lot. So it's those guys, Pentagram. If they're here, I love you, but otherwise, you know, why couldn't we allow the visitors to this show, many of them students, to actually contribute a part to the show as well through these stickers in this column that we designate in the exhibit? Why couldn't they come and put on their own soundtrack while they look at the show? And why couldn't we have a live Skype hookup to our office during the run of the show, so when people visit the show, they can actually talk to us and ask us questions while we're back in San Francisco? I don't know if the sound.
We thought we'd leave it open for people to see where we work.
But this is what happens. Like, we would yell at people from our end of the video thing, and they would start looking around and go,
"Oh man, we're working on Brian."
You know, via this Skype connection in Washington when we were back in San Francisco. And then why not, when we're done, make sure that this is sustainable? And so we took that large banner and we recycled them into tote and messenger bags through this local bag designer in Seattle. And then actually the wood tables that the work was on in that exhibit were taken by students for their studios and their apartments to work on. And then anything they didn't take, the gallerist said that they could easily cut up and reuse for future shows. And so when I think about this work and I look at it, we look at it in retrospect here, I see two through lines that I think are very important to the way that we think about our work. I think the first one comes from this wonderful definition of beauty that this friend of mine, Hamish Chandra, told me some years ago. And that the italics and underline are mine because I think this is a key distinction point in the way that we approach our work. And I think it's a big part of, comes from a lot of our backgrounds. As Jessica said, I come from an architecture background, and my business partner, Adam, worked for a long time in a firm that did a lot of environmental exhibit-based work. And so what this means to us is that when we approach this work that is ostensibly graphic design, we're always thinking beyond the visual, whether that's engaging all the senses like sound, taste, touch, hearing, but also just thinking about how can it be more experiential? How can it be more participatory? And so whether it's a tiny little booklet or a giant exhibit, this feeds into everything that we do. I would say the second line of thinking is comes from this epigraph that I love from that E.M. Forster wrote as the epigraph for his book Howard's End, which is this very simple term, only connect. And I think that for Adam and I, we tend to think less in terms of media and forms and more about like, how do we actually engage people? How do we actually get them to do something? It's what it does It's what the work does that matters more than sort of what it is and what it looks like. But I think it's important also to think about this idea of not just how you're connecting to people, the design that you're using, but the people you're actually trying to connect to. I think that it's very easy for design and design practitioners to kind of keep the discourse at this very kind of rarefied, sort of insular level. And sometimes students come to me and goes, yeah, I always have a hard time explaining to my parents what I do. And my response to them often is like, well, why don't you design something for them and show them, rather than having them be so mystified. And I think that Adam and I have both felt it very important that our work pushes out beyond this design discourse and really tries to speak and be done for audiences that maybe are beyond the usual kind of comfortable design circle. We did this exhibit on sustainability for the Boy Scouts in West Virginia, and the potential of getting ideas about how to teach sustainability to kids from all over America, 40,000 kids that would be visiting this every year. That was really important to us, that these ideas get out to people that maybe normally don't get this kind of design in the first place. So about a year and a half ago, we got a phone call from the University of Kentucky saying, hey, we have this gallery in the middle of this, redone art school, and we have a young design department. And, I've seen this picture on a lot of Pinterest boards of this exhibit that you guys did at Western Washington University. Would you like to come to University of Kentucky and have another exhibition? And of course, the answer was yes, but there was also this line of fear in the sense that we never thought we'd get one, let alone two. And so we felt like we had sort of blown all our ideas on the first one. And so when someone comes back to you and says that you want to do this again, I think that we both sort of said, great, but like, this is going to be really hard. And so the good news was that the gallery was not as large as that last one, but it was still a lot of space. And there was a strange kind of black box auxiliary room in the back that they wanted us to use. And so, and they had just gotten a Riso printer, and they wanted us to really kind of think about how we can incorporate the Riso in some sort of way into this exhibit. And so we said, great, let's do it. We can do this again. And so there's this joke in the office between Adam and I that even made it at one of those posters in the previous exhibit that, whenever we start a job, and I think I'm always eager to kind of take jobs. I'm always like, this is going to be easy. This is going to be really easy. It's just not a big deal. And Adam kind of rolls his eyes, and true enough, the job is not easy. And I don't think I've really ever learned this lesson. And thank God that, he's my business partner, or else, we'd be doomed. But this sort of idea began to percolate a little bit when we began to think about this exhibit. I think in this day and age, whether it's design annuals or infinite scrolls on Pinterest or Behance, students and designers are getting these very sort of slick, finished sort of photos of the work that are, divorced from any sort of context or stories around how they've been made. And I think it's especially detrimental to students who kind of think that these things come out fully formed, in a week and you're done. And so we began to think about, could this exhibit, because it is for students, it is as an art school, could we instead reverse this equation in the sense that we really privilege the philosophy and the process of what we do, which is normally a footnote in exhibits, and really diminish the sort of finished image of the work, and instead really focus on what does it take to make the work and visualize that instead. And so when we began to think about how we could structure it in the actual space, that auxiliary room really began to say that it was sort of like an id to us. Like if you think about the Freudian psyche, the id is kind of the animal brain, the sort of intuitive, non-logical, I would call sort of creative alchemy sort of part of the psyche. And so we thought, okay, maybe like if the ego is the work, that's in the center, the superego is sort of this kind of conscience, philosophy, evidence of process, is along the perimeter walls, and then we can sort of think about what we want to do for that id in that black, dark auxiliary room in the back. And so we basically had a schema now to sort of make this happen, but we really didn't know how it was going to shake out, in the real literal sense. And so, Adam and I are both old school sketchers, and and I think that this is the way we figure stuff out, and we just go through a lot of really bad designs or designs that we think are good, and then we put it in front of each other and our staff and our weekly creative meetings. They aren't so good, and so it takes time, especially for these complex jobs, and you really have to think through it. And we've always thought through it through sketching, and so these are some of our really sort of preliminary, not so great ideas, or not feasible ideas too. This is another thing that comes to the fore when you don't have a lot of money and it's an exhibit. And so sometimes we throw random stuff into the mix to try to figure it out. I have this box of Brian Eno's oblique strategies, and so we began to put these up every day as a way to kind of begin to trigger the designers to think about and us to think about this a little bit differently and shake loose some really specific solutions. And so slowly but surely, and when I'm showing you sections of our wall, things would go up on the wall, and we would slowly begin to figure out, okay, I think the superego thing, we should have a bunch of big statements that we really feel drive our work these days. We want it to feel messy, so maybe we'll make the whole thing out of 11 by 17 sheets of paper that we'll just print out of a printer, put together as giant tiles on the wall. We'll pull out every sketch that we've ever done for the last 20 years and just kind of litter it with, those sketches. So it gives off this very sort of process kind of feel, and it's not very precious. So that seemed like a slam dunk. We figured that we could make these smaller risograph prints that are sort of about process and how to work a little bit better, and we could make copies of them, hang them on the wall. People that could take the ones off that they want, and they could also contribute their own to the wall as well. And then in that id room, we thought we would sort of take our reel that's on our website and actually cut it into strips and make it into this sort of almost abstract sort of aural visual assault, where we would have this chopped up reel on each end of the space, and then we would overlay it with recordings from our office over the day and layer it into this sort of sound piece of infinite layers of things happening and people talking in our office that creates this complete like animal brain, like, whoa. But we would give people these noise canceling headphones that they could put on if they felt like it got too much, and inside the headphones would be these monologues about design as we see it, design about being designed for people, design about being this potential pause to really, think and question things, and then, design as, I forget what I remember what the third one is. Design as a questioning, a place to sort of question. So we had these so people could tune out if they needed to. And so, and then we began to think about the sort of middle space, how do we actually show the work? And we began to think about, okay, we could take these, we could repurpose these cardboard hollow tubes that are used to shape concrete, and we could sort of hang them from the ceiling and create this banner and have this banner that people kind of stand over and look at and touch. Not so dissimilar to the last banner that we did in the previous exhibit. And but the problem was we didn't want to make it like that again. And so we were really stuck in sort of trying to figure out like what's going to be on this banner. And this on the left is us actually mocking it up in our office. And so what was interesting is that I remember the meeting, we had one of those Brian, oblique strategies up on the wall, and this one was called Cut a Vital Connection. And we were sitting around talking, and we all thought, well, what if we just got rid of imagery altogether? Could we actually pull that off in a design exhibit? And we thought, yeah, I actually like the daring of that, but it felt like a little too much of a kind of FU to the audience. And so it led us to this idea of maybe augmented reality, because we've been, we wanted to push the idea of pushing ourselves into new realms in this too. Maybe augmented reality could be a way to sort of bring the work in, but in a way that's a little more unexpected. And so what happened was the banner became this just long sort of, flow of text, these single lines that describe a lot of our projects. And that's what it would be. And then, once you sort of, downloaded the app and began to sort of put your phone over these little pieces of art, they would reveal the actual work. And so the idea was that you actually had to do work to get to the work. And so almost reversing the usual equation, like we said before. And so, it was very fun. We used our kitchen to record a lot of the sound and those monologues. We made an Instagram filter just because why not? We tried to work in our employee Nicole's theremin into the show, but it just didn't quite make the cut, although it did make for a lot of fun in the studio. I show you this process to give you a little bit of transparency, but to also sort of, and then we had to install it, but to also sort of talk about how this kind of work is also very rewarding in the sense that it gets you off your computer because you're building stuff in the physical world. But unlike architecture, the scale of it is small enough. That's actually my dad in the lower left there, sort of pointing people. He was just like, I'm not getting involved. I'm terrible at this stuff. I'll just hang out. What's really wonderful about this kind of work is that unlike architecture, the scale of it allows you to do full size mock-ups. And what we found is that the process of this really creates a really great camaraderie in the office when we're doing this kind of work. And it's very satisfying to see these big things go up, but it's also satisfying in the sense that it feels like the office and the collaboration really starts to hum when we get out of from behind our screens and start trying to put this together. There's a tactility that's really wonderful. And if there's anything that I think we're all missing the most is this kind of process that is so hard to do right now because of the pandemic. So I'll quickly run through some of the actual finished work here. This was the entrance. This is the actual banner in the space from the other side. The reason that the typography on that banner has all these filled counters, it's not just a stylistic tick. It's because for the phone to read these quickly, the art has to have a degree of variability in terms of figure ground. And so what we discovered in the process is just straight type wouldn't work. And it actually, by filling in these counters, it actually made the app read the image to trigger the image in your phone a lot more quickly. So the stylistic tick is actually a functional one. And so this is how you can sort of see it in action here. The close-up on the right kind of gives you a good sense of how that looks. And then here are some screenshots of through the app that we actually took when we were doing some last tests, and you can see how those things show up. And what's really great is that you can have still images, you can have slideshows, you can have videos, and so there was a range of media that people could access if they wanted to take the time. But if they didn't, it was kind of okay. I mean, our work's accessible on our website, and we really wanted to make sure that it was the process and the words and the philosophy that really came forward first. And so, in a sense, this technology was actually, which I've not really found a lot of good uses for in our regular work, was actually a really great tool to push this idea a little bit more and still share our work. This is a few shots of the perimeter walls. The way these worked was we had sketches, these big quotes, and then if you went in a little bit closer, there was more content that kind of built on the big ideas that were on each one of these walls. So this is a few more. And you can see it's kind of nice. It's like sloppy, like we only pinned each sheet twice with pins. And so it has this very kind of combination of feeling organized, but not too precious. A few more images. This is the Rizzo wall. Some people have already left stuff. They shot these for us a week after the show was done. I'm very proud. I think the best designed one was actually done by my 11-year-old nephew, Nicolas. We got like 50 of these back recently, and I was like, his is still the best, man. It's in his blood. I'm excited. And then in this back wall, it's basically exactly how I explained it. You can kind of see there, and then this is the view from out of it, and then you can see how the image actually works in the space. And then if you're really curious, here's a little bit of a clip of the actual piece, really big with the sound overlaying. It becomes rather hypnotic after a while, to be honest. So it was great. Like, the show opened, a lot of people showed up, a lot of people engaged with it. It was really exciting. I think it was, for these students, their design program was very young. They're in Lexington, Kentucky. I don't think they get this kind of exposure to this. I think it was really great, and it was great to hear from them. That we got a lot of really interesting responses and feedback, and people actually did stay in that room and listen to the stuff, which was great. And I think that's often the most exciting part of, we show these images of the perfect exhibit, but for me, these are my favorite images of it, because people are actually interacting with it, which is what we want. And then, of course, they took it all down. They sent it back to us. The banner is being used by, or was going to be used by, the textiles department for them to practice and make sort of designs with. They sent all the sheets of paper back. We're going to turn them into little field note sketchbooks that we can send out to people, because the back side of the pages are blank, and so they can be used as sketchbooks, and we wanted to recycle all that. And so we leave the opening. It was awesome. I put my dad on a plane. I remember the last thing he said to me was like, don't worry about this virus thing. And that was it, right? And then everything went to black. And then we were stuck in our homes for a few days, and then, things just started to get crazy, right? I mean, like, a lot of really great and a lot of hard stuff really began to happen. And I think that it was hard not to feel in this moment that in some ways the world is burning, and that what we're doing feels, if not irrelevant, if not irrelevant in some cases, somewhat complicit in what's going on. And I think that as a designer, I think and I'm sure a lot of us have been doing a lot of soul searching and thinking about, how does our work or our teaching or whatever sort of fit into everything that's happening right now. So what's interesting is that early in the pandemic, I had this book on my shelf and I hadn't read it yet. And I thought, like, well, this might be a good book to read at this time, since we're kind of in the midst of a disaster. And I don't know if anybody's read this book. It's really great, but Rebecca Solnit basically walks through a lot of these disasters through history. And her thesis is that, amazing good things come out of these disasters socially. It's hard in the moment, but change and community and goodwill happen when these things happen. But she's very quick to point out that the good things usually happen on the ground, in the smaller parochial one-to-one relationships between people. It rarely comes from institutions or large organizations. If anything, the institutions and the large organizations get in the way. And I think you could argue that we're seeing a little bit of that right now, in the sense that certainly our government up to recently was a complete shit show. And I would say it's happened on the local level too. But at the same time, it's like, my wife and I have gotten super friendly with our neighbors who live like a door 10 feet from our front door, and they have become our pod, and we've become very close to them and have helped each other out. And so I think you see this stuff happen, and it's her thesis begins to play out. And, you know, I'm still teaching this TBD class. So at CCA, I run this thing called TBD, which is this, it's actually a studio of students that do real work for local nonprofits. And I see it as an antidote to two things. One is it's an antidote to the fact that because of the economics in San Francisco, it's very hard for us as volume to take on this work that usually doesn't pay anything. And the economics of running a business here are so much more Darwinian. But I think it also shows the students that there's sort of a third way in design. In the Bay Area, you know, they're seeing like, oh, I could go work for Lyft and work on this big app that serves billions of people, or I could go do this weird sort of, you know, arty design stuff and sell things at the SF book fair, and, you know, and a lot of what like some of my teachers are doing, and maybe I'm doing both because that's the only way to do it. And I think this class provides sort of a third way of like, hey, you know, you can point your design elsewhere. But I think the important distinction too is this idea of, you know, these are not big organizations. The work they're doing doesn't have this giant reach. But I make the argument to the students like, look, these organizations are the glue for our societies, our communities, our local communities here in San Francisco. And anything that you do for them that moves the needle slightly is going to make a huge difference. It's the difference between measuring the quantity of your interactions and what you're doing for design and the quality of them. And I said, we are squarely in the quality. And, you know, these organizations are really grateful. They're doing amazing things around elder care and like providing food to people who live in food deserts and, you know, urbanism. And, you know, there's just a lot of things that the students are doing that maybe don't feel very large in quantitative ways, but really sort of help in these amazing little ways that fuel these kind of changes that Rebecca Solnit is talking about. So about a month after the show, you know, it was very anticlimactic to sort of do the show and then come back to a pandemic, of course. One of the students in the UK posted this on Instagram. She had taken one of our or many, I guess, of those rezos and had talked about how much this exhibit had helped her through this time. And like, I'm super happy that, you know, people like the exhibit and it's been published in places and things like that. But, you know, when I see this, you know, this is the thing that makes it the most meaningful, that somebody of flesh and blood was really affected by this. And I think it's a line of thinking that needs to be maybe talked about a little bit more in design. I think in architecture and design, we tend to sort of think in these monumental quantitative ways. In architecture, it's like, here's the bird's eye rendering of the skyscraper amongst the cityscape. You don't see a single person. Or we're measuring the sales, we're measuring the social media hits, but the audiences, the people here are abstractions at best, if we're thinking about them at all. And, you know, this time and this work that we're doing and the TBD thing is really making me think about, well, what about measuring what we do in with this idea of intimacy and the quality of those interactions instead? How might this change the way we think about the way we approach design? Look, I'm not going to deny that right now there are some serious extra large problems in the world right now. Climate change, economic, you know, racial disparity, rights that needs to be wronged. I mean, the list is endless, right? But my feeling is, for me personally, like, let Bruce Mao and Rem Koolhaas deal with these. This is from their book. You know, I really right now, as I sit here alone in my studio, because I can't have my workers here and I can't be with the people that I love other than, you know, my immediate family. I think it's really changed in the way I think about design. And I really want to think about how we can focus on the small, because I have to think that the only way the big stuff is going to change and be designed really well is if the small stuff is going to be changed and designed well. In other words, only connect. Thank you.
Eric, amazing. Oh my God, you have so many interesting questions that people want to ask. And of course, we only have about 15 minutes left. I think I'd like to do this in an intimate way, which is to allow people to unmute themselves. So the first questions that came in, of which I think there are now going to be many flowing in, come to us from one of our cooperative members, Steve Thomas. Steve, I wonder if you could unmute and maybe ask one of the interesting questions you have put in the chat here.
Yeah, I was wondering about the First Amendment project that you did and how long it took for you to, well, how long did it take for that project to be completed? It's really interesting. To use the words as a protective barrier for the reporters, I thought it was a really cool concept.
Oh, yeah, that was a project done for Bloomberg. I mean, there was a period where we were working with this wonderful woman. Her name is Emanuela Frattini Magnuson, and she was the director of architecture at Bloomberg. And so, what's interesting about getting hired by a director of architecture as opposed to a director of brand is that she's really concerned about how our work, interfaces with the architecture, right? She was managing these renovations of these offices with these top tier architects. And she really wanted to make sure that our work, fit with their stuff really well. And she really cracked open a big thing for us as designers in the sense, like, why shouldn't we be approaching this work site specifically like architects would? Brand tends to be this one size fits all Levittown kind of like boom, 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 boom. No matter where you are, this is how it should look. And that's how Bloomberg was doing it. And when we began to dig into this, we discovered that, like, maybe we should be approaching this like the architects would, and instead really tune this stuff to not just Bloomberg, but like who's working in there, the city, that it exists in, the building itself, the architecture. Really kind of tune it to all that stuff rather than this abstract brand that has this very strict, sort of, I would argue, somewhat a little bit stale at the time anyway, expression. And so what happened there is that, the office was in DC. We were meeting with the architect the first time. I remember, like, literally before the meeting, I had some time. I went to the Vietnam Memorial, which I remembered seeing as a kid with my dad right after it opened. And it sticks with me forever. And I thought, wow, it'd be cool to do something like this someday. And so we're in this meeting with the architect. I mean, I was literally there, and we're looking at the floor plan, and we're talking, and we're sketching. And I went, wouldn't it be cool, since it's journalists, that if we like carved the First Amendment around the perimeter of this floor plan, creating like this moat, like I said? And they were like, and everyone looked at each other and went like, that's a great idea. Mm-hmm. And we know we can do it. Just give us the art. We have the marble. And so, that was the first art that we delivered within like a month of the job. And I think that the other lesson there too is that we were also thinking about ideas bigger than the brand, bigger than the company, right? This was about like journalism. And so when you begin to think like that, the ideas, I think, resonate more. And so what happened was that thing was installed in like July of 2016. We go to photograph it in January of 2017 after Trump is elected. And we show up on the weekend and we're photographing it, and some journalists come over to us and say, hey, why are you photographing this? And we're like, oh, we designed it. We're just trying to get some shots. And they were like, okay, just so you know, like, we bring in big people here, like people lead countries, diplomats, stars, and anybody who comes in here, we walk them right to the start of this thing and just explain to them, like, this is why we're here. This, and it had become this sort of symbol of resistance for people who were working there. We didn't intend that, but I think because the idea was bigger than the brand and them is a reason that we had this really nice accidental resonance.
Yeah, it's really
Colin Miller. Oh, I'm sorry. Colin Miller had the next question. I'm just trying to be mindful of all these people.
I was wondering about the funding of a number of the projects, the ones that were not obviously for clients, if that makes sense.
So the exhibits primarily, you would say?
Yeah.
So both of the the galleries, we had sort of a nominal fee. I think we had maybe $10,000 for the first one, and then maybe like $2,500 for the next one. And I think for us, we really don't want to be spending our own money on that stuff, and so we, try to basically, hem to those budgets and sort of squeeze them for all their worth. And that's part of the challenge too. I think it would be very easy to kind of spend a lot of money and kind of do the deluxe thing, but I think I sort of like being scrappy. I think that's part of being a designer, is using those constraints and seeing what you can actually can come out of it. So
Thank you, Eric. Hey, Muzan, wherever you are, we don't see you, but we see your name. Would you like to ask your question next?
Hi, thank you so much. It was really inspiring. And I was wondering, I used to go to all the galleries almost every week after work. Touching stuff was the main thing that connect me with the art or the exhibition. Now that it's all moved to remote sensing, I feel like the proportion of the senses we use have changed, and the relation that I have with the artworks that I see online has changed. And how do you think that would kind of have an impact on how art is experienced? And also, does it make sense to kind of keep that online for a long time, the idea of this exhibition living for a long time? Does that kill the magic of them or help, or what? I'd love to know what's your take on that.
it's a really good question. I mean, I think that I'm sort of with you, and maybe it's old fashioned or maybe it's not. I don't know. It's hard to imagine that you could ever sort of approximate the experience of sort of more traditional art exhibits virtually, right? I think it would be really hard. But I also begin to think about, like, is this the kind of thing that actually ends up changing art in some sort of way too? I mean, it's a really, I've gone to a few sort of webinars and things where galleries have given me the chance to walk through, or art fairs, or, here's the show as it would be virtually. And most of the time it's lacking, right? But I think this is the conundrum for us as a design practice, and for us as a, I don't know, at least in the short term, for us as a species. Like, how do we rejigger all this stuff in a way that still gives us what going to galleries and seeing things in person does, but when we can't do it, it's such a tough nut. I don't think the latest technology is necessarily figured it out yet, but at the same time, I'm grateful to be on a Zoom call and proxy of not seeing all of you in person. So I think it's just going to take some more inventiveness with what we have to see if there's a way forward. But do I have any ideas right now? No.
You will. Muzan, I think, are you in London, Muzan?
I'm in Manchester in UK.
Manchester in the UK. So we're staying in the same part of the general vicinity of the globe, and we're going to take the next question from our wonderful friend in Stockholm, Ida Wessel, who has to unmute herself.
Hi. Hi, thank you so much. And thank you for having a decent, airing time for this thing for us Europeans. We appreciate it a lot. I just want to thank you, Eric. I'm super jealous of all your commissions. I wish I, had the opportunity to do those things in like large formats like this. I was just, I'm happy that you're talking about those, the amazing opportunities for change there is right now. I mean, that's such a positive thing. And it's super interesting that you told about, the Solnit book and everything. I definitely have to read it. I was thinking about your, the process, like the weekly creative meetings you told about. Just thinking, how does that process look like? How does the sort of the structure look like? Do you have like a meeting each week, or When I looked at your website, it looked like you're just like 5. It's not a big studio, or?
No, we're not a huge studio, especially now where we've had to, like a lot of people, sort of contract a little bit, cut loose some of the freelance and other stuff. Well, right now it's hard. I mean, the way it worked in our studio is that we have this giant wall, and the idea was that when people got to a certain place, they'd put things up on the wall and we'd have informal critiques. But every Wednesday, we would take the afternoon to put everything up on the wall. And as a group, it doesn't matter who you were, an intern, project manager, you were all at the table talking about the work. And we have just found that we get to places so much more quickly, with that little, some people don't like brainstorming collaboration, but we thrive on that. I think it's just so much more productive when we're actually throwing things around together. But it's harder now, obviously. I mean, we have these, we usually meet once a day. Wednesdays are definitely the creative meeting still. Sometimes we'll look at creative stuff too. And it seems to work virtually better than I would expect, but not as good as I would like. I have to think that creative agencies or creative studios or even creative people that work together are going to hit a wall at some point with all this virtual kind of back and forth. There's just, again, going back to the previous question, there's just something about being in the same room that generates a certain alchemic energy. And I think that it's been hard, I think, to sustain that when you're already working on screen all day and then, I have to get on screen again and do the brainstorm through the screen again. I call it like the 20% Zoom surcharge, where like everything takes 20% longer, you're 20% more tired. And so I don't know what, Adam and I have been battering back and forth, like when there is a vaccine, or, is it like 2 of us come in a day and then all of us come in for like the afternoon for like 20 minutes and then everybody goes home. I mean, I really don't know how it's going to work, but I do know that weekly meeting has always been like the driving energy of everything that we've done. Everything, I've never figured out anything at my desk. It's always been in those meetings.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think it's, collaboration is one of those things that it's kind of gets a lot of play in very cliched ways, but I would argue that the lone genius to me needs to die as well. So,
I kind of like being a lone genius, but it's only because I'm old. We are soon to run out of time, and I think it is very appropriate that we take our last question from Emma Steinholbel. For those of you who don't know, I embarrass her every time she shows up. She has come to every single one of these things we've had since March. She is a newly minted graduate who might still need a job. Do you still need a job? Are you still looking for work, Emma? Yeah. Okay. So if anybody's hiring, I can attest to the fact that her loyalty to Design Observer makes her kind of the patron saint of these online show and tell conversations. So I think she has a bunch of questions. Maybe she can summarize 1 or 2 of them in the time we have left. Emma.
Yeah. Can you hear me? I don't know if my earbuds are. Yeah, we're good. I kind of had a lot of similar questions to what Ida was saying, just about what collaboration looks like in this time. I've definitely felt what we've all been talking about, that lack of actually being in the same room. What I just said, the serendipity of just like actually collaborating and throwing things on the wall. So I'd love to hear just any more you have about what that process looks like, and I guess just opening it up to everyone quickly, like where we think it's going. I'd just really love to hear from you.
Eric, you got 3 minutes.
So you want me to elaborate a little bit more on the collaborative process and where you think it's going?
Yeah, more just like, so I guess we're talking about exhibition design and the way that everyone has solutions, VR, AR, whatever. But where in that is the emotion, I guess?
That's a good question. I have to say that as someone who can sometimes be overly skeptical of technology, I'm always sort of equally open to being amazed by it. And I have a close colleague who's been teaching an AR, VR class, and the stuff that comes out of that course is actually a lot of it is quite amazing, and projects that really avail us the ability to be put in somebody else's shoes a lot easier than it would be to approximate it through other means. And and I just think when certain doors are closed off, new ones open up, and I think that but I think, like anything, we as designers have to think it through and keep those things that are important to us front of mind. It's easy, right, especially right now, for technology sort of to be the tail that's wagging the dog, right? It's sort of just like we do it because we have it, and it's the default, right? And I think it's important to, I can't tell you how many times people come to us for like, we need an exhibit and there has to be like 17 screens on the wall so we can project things, people can interact. And we have to stop and go, look, those things are $2 million. They always break down. And why do you need 17 screens? And then you walk them back, and sometimes they still get the screen. But at the same time, it's like, you have to keep your eye on the ball in terms of like, what are we trying to accomplish, right? And that goes back to thinking about collaboration too. It's like, I think it was one of these sessions where Bobby Martin talked about like, oh, I thought I had to have my designers in like every day for like 4 meetings a day. And I realized, actually, I only need to talk to them like once a day. It's fine. Like, I need to like let it go, right? And I thought that was really insightful of him to sort of realize like, oh yeah, like in some ways, and I have to say, working at home and, my wife down the hall, and, I'm a lot calmer, and I get a lot more things done in a lot of ways too. So I think that, it's kind of a windy sort of non-answer, but, for me, I'm just trying to keep my mind open to the fact that, going back to the Rebecca Solnit book, is that there's opportunity in all of this too, and all of this horrible things that are happening, and not to diminish all the bad things that are happening to certain people that aren't as fortunate as us to be able to work at home and do these things. But there's still opportunity there if we're willing to look for it. And I always joke that, like, I talked about being sort of skeptical and ambivalent, but like for me, design is the place that I am 100% optimistic. When I get into the design zone, I suddenly become this giant, like, Silicon Valley optimist, minus the libertarian views, and so I would
Eric,
just,
you are a ray of light.
thank you.
Eric Heiman, the gift that keeps on giving. If you all will take a look at the chat window before we close, Eric has very generously shared his email address for all the questions we did not have time to get to. Betsy has shared more from the wonderful website that Volume has that shows all their projects.